Hey everybody, welcome to our third mini lecture on the brain. So, last time we talked, we were looking at those two cerebral hemispheres. We noticed that they were separated by a longitudinal fissure and that they made up about 80% of the entire brain, and they had these ridges and grooves. The ridges were gyri, the grooves are sulci. And now, what we got here is I hate this thing. Do not remind me. What we've got here is a frontal section of the brain. And what this is going to let us see are a couple things. First of all, this is our cerebrum, basically. It's like this right here, two cerebral hemispheres. Bum, 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 like a mushroom right there. Those are my two cerebral hemispheres. Okay? And in terms of other big parts of the brain, right here, this is going to be the diencephalon. And then this is going to be our brainstem, and these guys out here are the cerebellum. So those are our big structures we can see. Now, as far as the cerebrum goes, as far as the cerebral hemisphere goes, I want you to notice that there is this outer layer that is called gray matter. Remember, we saw gray matter in the spinal cord as well. This outer layer of gray matter here, this outer layer of gray matter is also called the cerebral cortex. So it is also called the cerebral cortex. This is where your brain's integration is going to take place. Now, notice how the gray matter follows the folds here, the gyri and the sulci. Now, deep to the gray matter, we are going to have an area of white matter. Remember, white matter is made out of what? Somebody shouted out, what's white matter made out of? The answer is myelinated axons. We'll actually look at the different types of white matter a little bit later on. Now, one other thing we want to notice is that we can see some areas of gray matter besides the cortex. I'm circling a pair of them right there. Each of those is called a cerebral nucleus. Those are islands of gray matter that are deep within the cerebrum. All right, just for fun, let's see if we can point out some ventricles here. We totally can. Right here and right here, I have a pair of lateral ventricles. The structure separating them, right here, this guy, is of course the septum pellucidum. We met him in the lab we did on the brain. Now, I also am going to see my third ventricle right there. And in that third ventricle, I can even see the interthalamic adhesion, which is right there. All righty. Let's keep on going. Let's go on to another slide here. And let's look at the lobes. There are 4 lobes to your cerebrum on each side. There is a frontal lobe near the frontal bone, of course. Behind it, there is a parietal lobe. Behind that, an occipital lobe. Notice the similarity to the names of the bones here. Now, on the lateral side, we have a temporal lobe. And then tucked away, kind of behind the temporal lobe, right here, this little guy is the insula. So we got to know those 5 lobes. We're going to look at all 5 of them and see the different things that they do. And we also have to be aware of one important sulcus right now. There is a sulcus called the central sulcus. It is going to separate our parietal and our frontal lobes. All right. We are now going to talk about the frontal lobe and all of its many jobs. Starting with a part of the frontal lobe called the primary motor cortex. The primary motor cortex is right here. It's this red guy right here. It is also known, it is located, there we go, that's the word I want, on the precentral gyrus. So the precentral gyrus is this ridge right here. It's a gyrus, so it's a ridge. It is in front of the central sulcus. That's why it is called precentral. And this region of gray matter here, remember the cortex is the outside, the gray matter. This region of gray matter here is where you have your voluntary motor control. There are neurons here called pyramidal neurons, and that is where you initiate voluntary movements. All right. Let's talk a little more about this guy, okay? All right. Start on the brain up top here for me, please. If we start on the brain up here, this brain right here, in blue, we have highlighted the precentral gyrus. And then what we're doing in this bigger picture down here, so this bigger picture here, we have the precentral gyrus, where I'm shaking my mouse. I'm going along the precentral gyrus. Now remember, we just learned the precentral gyrus is voluntary motor control. So what I'm seeing here is how there are different regions of the precentral gyrus that correspond to different parts of the body. So over here, we have a part kind of within that longitudinal fissure that corresponds to the toes. So if you activate neurons here, you are going to move your toes. Then we have a part that corresponds to the ankle, and a part that corresponds to the knee, and one for the hip, and the trunk, and the shoulder, and so on and so forth, all the way down. So if you had a stroke in a certain one of these regions, then you wouldn't be able to move that particular body part. All right, something else we got to notice here. Look at the total amount of space dedicated to the hand and the fingers. The hand and the fingers gets this much brain space. That is because your hand and fingers are so capable of delicate, fine, precise movements that they need a lot of brain area for it. Other places that also get a lot of brain real estate include the eye, the lips, and the tongue, because these are all things where we need to have a lot of precise, small movements. All right, let's clear all this. Move on to the next slide. This is just a drawing to give you an idea of where these things are. So if you imagine you put some toes and a foot, a leg, a knee, a thigh, a butt, chest, arm, hand, face, and tongue. So you draw that kind of on this quarter circle, and this shows us where the different regions are, and also gives us an idea of the proportions that we devote to these different body parts. Speaking of the proportions that are devoted to this body part, look at this scary guy. This scary guy is the motor homunculus. And he is basically showing us how much brain is devoted to different body regions. All right. Good stuff.